This is a Pensioners for Independence podcast. Our guest is Mike Russell, President of the SNP. The meeting's chaired by Alan Logue of the Glasgow Pensioners for Independence group. Welcome to Glasgow Pensioners for Independence, Michael. And I see from Wikipedia that you were born in 1953, so you yourself are definitely into the pensioners' age group now. Well, Michael became an MSP in 1999 in the first session of our modern Scottish Parliament, and with only a few years' break in the early 2000s, he's been an MSP ever since. As Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, Europe and External Affairs, he was Scotland's front man in the Westminster's Brexit negotiations. I'm betting there are a few good stories to tell from being in those meetings. He's now president of the SNP and political director at SNP's Independence Unit. The path to independence is proving to be a rather longer and more winding path than we wanted, and it will come as no surprise to you, Mike, that as independence supporting pensioners, we have a very personal and acute interest in that path being as short as possible here on in. We want to be around for the Declaration of Scotland as an independent country. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Marlene, for the introduction too, and I'm grateful for the invitation to speak here today. Marlene, you're right to say that I am qualified to be a member of this group, and indeed I may well sign up. I'm 68 years old. I retired from the Parliament when I was 67, and I had hoped to spend a bit of time on something other than politics. I am a part-time professor at Glasgow University in Scottish culture and governance. I was taking that role up again to do a little bit of postgraduate teaching, a little bit of research, and of course writing my weekly column in the National. But last year, I was asked if I would stand for the party presidency. I was a bit overwhelmed by the thought. I remember Winnie Ewing as the party president. I remember Billy Wolfe as the party president. It seemed highly unlikely that I would walk in those shoes, but I did accept the invitation and I was elected. And it was at a time of particular difficulty for the SNP. I mean, I'm happy to talk about that later if people want to talk about it. And then having got through it and having retired, Nicola then asked me if I would help to essentially to restart the campaign. And I think that's an important place to begin with. I have said often over the years, recent years, that I would like to have seen a referendum on independence as soon as we could possibly arrange it after the Brexit decisions that have been put in place. And indeed, my own view was that could happen in the latter part of 2020. But of course, the pandemic made that impossible. And it still makes normal politics or normal referendum politics very difficult indeed. We've seen today, for example, the drafting in of some military personnel to 2 health boards in Scotland. The pressures upon our health service are enormous, and the pandemic is still with us. The figures today show, I think, 2,900 new infections, although its deadly effect has been severely blunted by the availability of the vaccines. And the type of campaign we need to have to win a referendum and to win independence is a campaign of conversion. It is a campaign in which we meet people, we talk to people, we address meetings, we listen to questions, and we change people's minds. It's not actually the type of campaign we've just been through in May this year, which was a very, very unusual campaign, but it wasn't that type of campaign. And therefore, I don't believe it is possible to hold a referendum campaign until we are in a more normal situation. And I am as impatient as everybody else in this call. And Marlene, I fully understand the imperative you are referring to. I feel it myself on a daily basis. But we can't afford to go into a campaign in a way that's not going to win it. And we need to win it by converting people. And there are people out there, what I would call soft nose, people who will change their minds. But we have to get to them and we have to persuade them. So I want to start on that to say that I don't know when precisely the referendum will be. Nicola has given a very strong indication, and I'm glad that she's done this, that she wants it to be in the first half of this Parliament, which puts it in at the latest towards the end of 2023. It is quite clear that we have the votes in the Scottish Parliament to do the referendum. And of course, we've also taken a different position as a government in the run-up to the election in May, not to put ourselves in a position of people saying to us, what are you going to do to have the referendum? To say, we know what we're going to do, which is we'll introduce a bill. And if that bill passes the Parliament, as it will, we'll hold the referendum. And actually, the question is, what is the UK government going to do in those circumstances with a clear cast iron mandate to hold that referendum? Is it going to go to court and stop that happening? Because if it does, it will be going to court to stop the democratic wishes of the Scottish people being fulfilled. So there will be a referendum. I'm sure of that. Some of the criticism to say that Nicola and others aren't interested in the referendum is simply untrue, and I know it's untrue. Certainly not true of me, and it's not true of her, and it's not true of anybody I know in those positions. But it's got to be at the time in which we can win it and we can make those conversions. So when I was asked to restart what was taking place, I set myself essentially 3 tasks. And I just want to mention those tasks because I think they are the tasks that we need to fulfill as we are on this stage of the road to independence. And the first one is to start the flow of information again, and also to make sure that we're answering some of the difficult questions again. And this flow of information has started. The members of the SNP are receiving a regular mailing from me with information and statistics and I hope helpful things. In addition, there's good work being done in other bodies. Believe in Scotland, Business of Scotland, for example, are doing good work in producing material, and I'm encouraging people to get hold of that, to make sure it's available and make sure that people have it. And also things like an 8-page printed leaflet, which we produced earlier in the summer for individuals. We're hoping to provide actual material for distribution by the SNP in November in the run-up to St Andrew's Day. Now, I would like to provide more for people who aren't in the SNP, but I don't have the resource to do that. And also, data protection considerations means I can't use, for example, mailing lists that were previously put together for other purposes. But I hope, and this is coming to perhaps the bridging point to the second point, I hope we can also establish better relationships across the whole Yes movement. There are a range of bodies like this one, which are non-party political, which have many members of the SNP in them, but have members of other parties and have no party in them. And I hope we can find a way to work together constructively to win that referendum and to move to independence. It won't be the same for those who were there as the campaign in 2014. Politics has moved on. Our views of each other have moved on. And we'll have to find a way to work together in positively and courteously, agreeing to differ on some issues. And that will mean a different type of campaign and a different type of envisioning of what an independent Scotland would look like, about the ability to change as well as what changes. And I've started that dialogue with other Yes groups. I mean, this is part of it, but as some people on this call know, I've also encouraged getting together to look at the issue of a transitional constitution, which is something that will reassure those who are not convinced by independence that their rights will be protected as we move towards independence. And that's been very important in a whole range of places across the world when independence has become a key issue. And in places where that has not worked, then independence has been damaged by it. So the first task has been to start the flow of information and to draw information done, and there's work also being done in government, and Nicola announced in the programme for government that work was restarting, work that I was doing, that my officials were doing, that stopped in March 2020. Work was being done on things like the transitional constitution, work being done by researchers, and work being done across the Yes movement. And all those things are I see things I can help with and encourage others to be involved with. And the third task I have, which is largely a task within the SNP that has some implications outside, is to slowly but surely build the capability of the party so that when the referendum bill goes into the Scottish Parliament, and when it comes through at the other end and the referendum date is set and we're ready for the full campaign, that the party is ready. The structures and the organizational ability of the party is ready. And I will play that role alongside people at HQ and elected office bearers of the party, and that's what I'm trying to do. Now, all that is regrowing the campaign as far as the SNP is concerned, and also engaging with others in a way that we weren't able to do during the pandemic, and also during the difficult winter and spring when we've had disagreements within the Yes movement that, for many of us, have been have been very disturbing and very difficult. You know, it's no secret I was Alex Salmond's campaign manager in 1990 when he became leader. I worked very closely with him, as did Nicola, as did John, and it's been a difficult period for us, and it's a difficult period for everybody in the movement. And I can understand the frustrations that have built up, but we have to get through that. We have to move through that. And we have to get on with the task of building the independence campaign, and that's what I'm trying to do. Now, I hope that answers the processy and the technical questions. In terms of the questions of what independence will mean and how it will operate and how to get there and some of the key issues that we need to decide on, some of those questions need fresh answers after the pandemic, after Brexit. They're not the same answers that are contained in this wonderful publication, which I keep on my shelves, Scotland's Future, which was, of course, our manifesto for independence in 2014, launched at the end, I think in November 2013. And I used it as my core document going round Argyll and Bute. I set myself the task in 2013 and 2014 of doing a meeting in every village hall in Argyll and Bute. And those of you who know Argyll and Bute know there are a few village halls. And I think I managed almost all of them. But it won't be the same as that, because many of the things in that, not all of them, have been passed by Brexit and by the pandemic and by where we find ourselves. And other issues arise, such as, you know, maybe we need to have aid memoirs for people on key issues, but maybe we don't need to produce another 600 pages. Maybe the 600 pages was the approach for that time and is a different approach for this time. But we do need to provide solid information. And we know from opinion polling and we know from focus grouping that people want impartial information. They want information they can rely on. And they don't necessarily feel they get that from political parties, but they don't necessarily get it from yes groups either. So we need to find ways of securing that for people. So any of those issues and any other issue, I'm happy to address and to answer questions. There are many people in this call I know, and some I know extremely well and have been friends for a very long time, and others I don't know, but I'm absolutely open to question, and I'll do my very best to answer those questions in the next 45 minutes or so. So over to you again, Alan, and happy to address them.
Oh, thanks for that, Mike. At the moment, there's no questions in the chat, but I'll start off and ask one. As our name suggests, we're all pensioners. In the last referendum, that was one of the big scare tactics that was used against the voters, even outside the polling stations. If you vote yes, you lose your pension. And of course, there was the letter from the DWP, etc. But I'm asking if the SNP or yourselves are considering any sort of consultation like you're doing on the Constitution, on how an independent Scotland can have a decent pension, which in turn would reassure their pensioners. Will give us more ammunition when we're out discussing it.
Yes, I mean, I think there's a number of strands to that we can reassure people with and point forward with. One is the Social Justice Commission that the party set up and which reported earlier this year, which is very focused on two things. Firstly, the ability to do things better in the well-being economy, and that includes pensions. And then that's an ability that is granted to any party in an independent Scotland, because we will have the ability to do all of those things, which we don't have now. And then secondly, what specific commitments would we enter into? And the specific commitments have to include not just a guarantee of pensions, and not just a guarantee of pensions that persuades people there is a guarantee, but also a progressive view of pensions, because we have, as we know, every one of us who's drawing a pension, we have the lowest pensions, state pensions in Europe. So there needs to be a commitment to an increase for those pensions. But we also need to give people a commitment to an economy that works and guarantees people's savings and resources. I remember very, very vividly sitting outside the Bank of Scotland in Tarbert the day before the 2014 referendum with a lady who was going in to take out her savings because she had become convinced that that money would not be safe if independence took place. So we have to reassure people about that too. And those are both things that can be done by the work that was already started within government when I left, and which can now be completed as we move out from the pandemic. And we've got to be able to do so. because the demographic we're talking about is the demographic least likely to vote for independence. And they won't just be bribed. It's also people have to believe what they're being told. And we have to make sure that the information they get is verifiable and secure. Now, I always say on these occasions, however, even if the Archangel Gabriel, arrived with tablets of stone, some people would not believe it. People will criticize it, and there will be, a opposition to it. But we need to find a way that what we say has that credibility and also has that detail. So yes, Alan, that is being addressed and will be addressed.
Thanks for coming to talk to us. Now, I'm a bit worried about the fact that we don't have any idea yet of what currency we're going to use. Now, independence, Pensioners for Independence, there's a group of us that run stalls twice a week in Glasgow on Argyle Street, and we are making progress and actually just getting people to discuss what their issues that they have, but we need to be able to answer concrete questions, as in, what is the currency going to be once we are independent? And I think that's pretty crucial. And people want to be assured of stability. That's their worry as well. They're scared in case, like you said, they're going to lose their money. Yeah.
Let's just distinguish between the S movement and the SNP. The SNP does have a policy on currency. It's a very clear policy on currency, which is that there will be a transitionary period and we will move to a Scottish currency. Now, the position we're in now is that Nicola has rightly said that after Brexit and after the pandemic, we should look again at all our assumptions that we have made, and that's the right thing to do. But there is a policy on currency, and it's been a bit clouded by opposition to it from some people who don't seem to fully understand a real imperative in this. We've got to have something that is credible, not just to our population, and I agree that's very important, but it's credible to the EU and it meets the Copenhagen criteria so that we can move from independence into membership of the EU. So we've got to have a policy that's credible on the international scene, as well as that's credible here. And that policy is credible in both places. But some of the work that's being done in government is to look at that again and to make sure, first of all, that the policy does have credibility. And secondly, and crucially, and I agree with you on this, Isabel, to find ways to persuade people who are not economists, who are not currency experts, and that's all of us, by and large, that this is possible and doable, right? So I accept the point. It is something that is being re-examined, but it's not right to say there isn't an idea. There is a clear idea. It is laid out in the Grace Commission report and was adopted by the party. There will be a Scottish currency after a period of transition, and that fits in with the requirement we will have, for example, to raise money on and borrow money, which every state has, and which we have to do.
Yeah.
So we have to have a credible policy as well as one that perhaps is politically popular, and that is an issue at the present moment.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
I just wondered, in the first place, who you're actually relating to and drawing up what kind of an independent Scotland we're going to have. Are you still using the Sustainable Growth Commission thing for as a basis and just tweaking it, or are you kind of going back to the drawing board? And I have to say the Sustainable Growth Commission was quite unpopular in a lot of areas for things like, the austerity bit, how long they were saying, I know that that's been rescinded, how long it was going to be before we had our own currency, things like paying off the UK's debts without or paying money to them forever and a day, things like that. So are you kind of drawing up a new thing and not just using that and tweaking it? And the other thing is, how wide are you throwing the net of who you refer to? For instance, there's a whole lot of think tanks who may or may not be as popular with the SNP, I don't know. The Scottish Independence Convention has produced a whole lot of transition papers. Obviously, you can't just take them, but are they being included in your references? And even, dare I say, Commonweal have produced quite a lot of ideas and so on. They are a think tank, and they've produced a lot of academic ideas, and I do get the impression that Commonweal has never been flavour of the month with the SNP. I would like to see everybody being included when they're when you're drawing up plans for a new country. So how widely are you spreading the net, and are you still basing it on the Sustainable Growth Commission? That's the two questions.
Well, let's take a step back, Mary, because you know that we've been doing work on this transitional constitution. Mm-hmm. If you look at the composition of the group that met to do that, Commonweal was there, Scottish Independence Convention was there. I chaired the AGM of the Scottish Independence Convention last week. So I'm not, I hope, in bad odor with any of them, and I hope they're not in bad odor with me. So, as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy to have conversations on the basis that we won't agree with everything, but, we can make common cause on independence, and there are many things we do agree on. Yep. For example, on the issue of land reform, I would regard myself as probably more radical than Commonweal on some of those issues there. So, I don't think it's fair to stereotype it as in the way that we might do. There is solidarity in achieving independence. The only caveats I would put in is that we have to treat each other with respect, and we have to be courteous towards each other. And I'm not going to encourage working with people who will not do those things. But otherwise, everything is available, and I'm happy to work with people. Now, we also have to recognize the different nature of our organizations. I'm the president of a political party that makes decisions democratically, looked at the Growth Commission report, approved the Growth Commission report with some tweaking, and has subsequently, as you say, made some changes in the light of experience. It is free to make further changes. That would be the policy of the SNP. It doesn't have to be the policy of Pensioners for Independence or anybody else. It would be what we would offer in our manifesto for independence. But it wouldn't be in our constitution, because what we're talking about is getting together to get a transitional constitution, to win a referendum, which we're trying to do, and then each of us will contend on how our policies are put in place. The issue on currency is, will we have a currency? Yes, we have to. We would not uniquely be the only country in the world that dealt in cowrie shells. There would be a currency. We would have to have the surroundings for that in European terms, so that we were part of, had our central bank, or there was a European central bank. We would have to be able to show that we were capable of doing that. So there's international obligations to be met. The issue of debt would have to be resolved. The reason the Growth Commission took the issue of debt in the way it did was because there are issues about international financing and borrowing money, and any country that's not willing to show and service its debt will be in trouble. On the other hand, the example of Ireland, Ireland in actual fact did not meet any part of debt, but it did pay, and this is an important quid pro quo that people forget, it did agree to pay reparations for damages caused during the Civil War. Right? So there was payment made by the Irish state. It was simply not to pay the debt that the UK had accumulated. So there are issues still to be discussed there. We're not at the present moment just throwing all the policy out, but Nicola's made it clear that we will have a critical eye on some of the policy that we have adopted in the light of both Brexit and the pandemic. And therefore, the issue of currency, no doubt, will be revisited. But it has to be a currency proposal that's credible. I go back to that, both internationally and domestically. It is vitally important, and it would serve nobody if it wasn't. It has to be credible and understandable, and it will be. So I just want to, I want to make the difference between what we all agree, which is on independence, and I think we have a broad level of agreement that we want a different type of country. A more equitable, a more equal country, a country of greater opportunity, country of greater fairness, but we will have some detail that we will not agree on. And therefore we will contend upon those things, and we need to do it with as much positivity as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Angi Maxwell says, I hope we're not planning a civil war. No, we're not. I use the analogy only to make a point about what is actually a much quoted situation of debt. It is, as ever, not quite as simple as it looks. Geoff Bush has asked, I'm sorry, Alan, I'm just picking them up in the thing as we go along. The title of the talk is A Route to Independence. Did I get a hint that the Scottish Government has given up the Section 30 route and is prepared to just go straight to Holyrood authorised referendum? Well, in a sense, that is what the manifesto said in May. We published a bill. There are 3 bills that are important here. 2 have been passed. The generic referendum bill, which I took through 18 months, almost 2 years ago, which make the general arrangements for any referendum, which we did not have, which exists in England and Wales in the PROPERA legislation, but we didn't have, so we did that. The franchise bill, which gives a very wide franchise indeed, a franchise based on residence, not on citizenship, which is, I think, very important. And then the third bill we published in draft form just before the election. And that bill says, you know, what the question would be, and we'll make the financial arrangements. And we've said we'll bring that in at the right time, we'll pass that, there's a majority for it, and then we'll proceed to implement it. Now, there's no harm as a side bet to say, you know, by the way, can we have a Section 30 order? But it's not dependent upon that, because we have said that we will bring that bill and we will put it in place. And that's what we should do. And Craig Dempsey, what is plan B if Johnson says no? Well, that gets us back to the old thinking, you know, which is, what are you going to do? What we're going to do is quite clear. We're going to put the bill in, and we're going to operate the bill, and we're going to run through the bill. If somebody else then comes along and says we want to stop this, that's their business, but we'll defend that very vigorously. But, you know, devolution is as it is. We want to move on from devolution, and this is the way we believe we should do it. And we want the UK to get wise to that, and, you know, we're going to continue in that vein.
Just to come back, Mike, on the point, if you're going to go ahead with the referendum anyway, could I question the rationale of even asking for a Section 30?
Yeah, you can question whatever you like, and happy to have a debate about it. I think that it is probably necessary in terms of international views, and I go back to international view. I think it's necessary to show that you have endeavoured to do everything possible to get an agreement on having it. But, you know, that's not going to be a decision for me. I mean, I'm not in the Parliament and I'm not in the government. I think there is some sense in doing so, but equally it is not dependent upon that, and we wait and see what happens thereafter.
I disagree that it's necessary to do that internationally. If you can name on the fingers of one finger the number of countries that have become independent and internationally recognised as a result of a referendum. It's just not correct that we need to ask for a Section 30 in order to seek and gain international recognition. That's incorrect.
Well, in your opinion, Geoff, it's incorrect. I've heard opinions to the contrary, and of course, you know, the point is that this has never been tested, and it's never been tested in court. And what we had in the attempt to test it was, well, it frankly went off at half cock and was ill-conceived. So, you know, we would agree to disagree on that. My view is that it does no harm to do so, but we would not be dependent upon it. But you have a different view. Fine.
Yeah, I think that you'd mentioned earlier on, Mike, that winning people over is obviously a necessary part of the strategy if we want to get a different result. And I was wondering whether the Labour Party supporters is the most obvious group that you're planning to target, because my recollection is that there's a sizable number in the Scottish Labour Party that, even if they don't necessarily agree on independence, believe there should be a second referendum. And I think it was this week in a poll in England, 40% of Labour Party supporters indicated that they believe Scotland should be independent. So is that the most obvious hunting ground for conversion, and what methods might be used to help that?
It's what, yeah, John, it's one of the hunting grounds. I mean, there are undoubtedly people in the Tory party too, and fewer Liberal Democrats, but there are people in all parties who believe, first of all, you're right to say that a referendum should be held, even if they disagree on independence. But there are, of course, independent supporters in the Labour Party. We know that, and there are people who are willing to be convinced. So yes, that is a key demographic. But there's a wider demographic too. There's some quite interesting internal research that tends to show that many people in that middle group who say they're not going to vote for independence, but, you know, might be persuaded, they see independence, and I'm not making an exact analogy here, but they see independence like having a better car. It'd be something they might like to have, but they don't think they can afford it, you know, so they're prepared to continue as they are. We have to do two things. One is we have to persuade them they can afford it, and secondly, we have to persuade them, in fact, they can't not afford it, so to speak. You know, this is really important to them. And that's a very interesting group. because it's a group that goes right across the ages too, and the age ranges. So, there's quite a lot of thinking goes into this all the time. Who would you be trying to get hold of, and how would you switch people from no to yes? And how would you switch some people who've gone from yes to no back to yes? And there's a European issue in there, of course, which is one that we need to talk about, but in actual fact, I don't think there's easy answers to. But yes, Labour is very, very important, and Labour voters for independence. And it's interesting, actually, they have a real set of problems. I was surprised, some of you may have seen the Falkirk council by-election result today, which gave the SNP a narrow victory. But the Labour vote really collapsed. This was a seat held by the former Labour provost of Falkirk, and it melted away. The Tories were the significant challengers to it. And it seems to me that Labour has, in failing to address the constitutional question, really created the worst of all worlds for itself, because it's being constantly outbid on unionism by the Tories. And that the Liberals are girdling around for that vote as well. And isn't convincing even its own supporters of where it is. So, if I thought Anna Sarwar was cleverer clearly than he is, but one of the great issues for Labour is, can they revive in any sense without recognising that the Constitution is the key issue they have to address?
I just wondered why, in light of the fact that several polls have been commissioned by the UK government about the likelihood of independence in Scotland, and we've got a freedom of information request which is being refused for quite some time. First of all, is there any way we can force the UK government to release this information? I'm assuming the reason they haven't released it is because it's good for Scotland. Is there any way that Scottish Government can commission our own poll to give us an idea what the actual yes vote is throughout Scotland, so that we know what we're fighting for, and the uphill struggle that we've got to overcome to convince the UK government, or as they say, the settled will of the Scottish people will then force a referendum, regardless of whether Westminster allows a Section 30 order or not.
There's a series of important issues in there, and thank you for that. I think that in the end, the UK government will have to release the material, because I don't think you can stand against an information commissioner's request and the courts entirely, but they will delay as long as possible. I wouldn't put it past, Marlene talked about the experience of UK government. I would not put it past Michael Gove to be in a double bluff situation here. In actual fact, the figures are not particularly significant in any way, and he's making quite a lot of it in order to further to be a bit of a letdown. He is the most sleeked individual I have ever met. If he told me the sky was blue, I would go out and check. So I'm not quite as confident as some people are with this, But that being said, I don't think in the end the government can stand against this. And lots of good work is done by people like Jolyon Maughan on the Good Law Project. They bring a lot of pressure to bear on the UK and a whole range of things. But there's also the issue of double standards. I mean, one of the reasons I think the Scottish government would not commission such a poll is that we could never get away with it. Immediately, no matter what the result was, we'd have to release it. And if we tried not to, we would be pilloried. And even if we did it, we would be pilloried for spending government money on it. So actually, given that there are regular polls on this subject, I don't think we need to do that. There's also quite a lot of private polling done by a range of organizations which isn't published, but which one can get access to. So I think we've probably got the information we need, and the party does some focus grouping and polling too to understand what's going on. But there's really strong double standards operating, all the time. I mean, if you look at it today, I mean, this is just an example. The very difficult news that one of the laboratories in England has been issuing results which are questionable. If that was in Scotland, there would have been a motion for a recall of Parliament. I mean, Parliament's on 2-week break at the moment. It would have been all over the place with the Scottish government. But I've read all the reports, and I can't see any criticism of the UK government at all in it. And and actually, that's a sensible thing. Governments do not do tests. But the double standards are constant, and therefore I just think Scottish government commissioning a poll. If I had if I had been approaching government about that, I would have said it's not worth it, because it'll simply be more grief than we can put up with.
My question's maybe not directly about independence, so it's sort of tangentially. I know you don't speak anymore for the Scottish Government, but I was just wondering, why is it that a country like Scotland that's got 90 islands, a coastline the length of China's, and we're no longer subject to EU procurement rules and so on, why is it we can't kickstart a shipbuilding industry? And Romania, much poorer than we are, virtually landlocked, away off the other side of the planet, far away from the Atlantic, they seem to be able to get a chance anyway in muscling in our shipbuilding. Now, I know about McCall's problems with fulfilling their current order book and so on, but really, to me, it's a failure of long-term aspiration. This was a big chance. The Scottish Government should have pulled out all the stops to give one or two of these ferry contracts to a Scottish shipbuilding industry, so we can have a shipbuilding industry that's not reliant on the MOD. To me, it just seemed a wee bit like the Scottish cringe, which is usually applied in a cultural sense, but in here it would be a bit industrial. Looking at the long term, why can't Scotland have a shipbuilding industry when Romania can?
I don't know. I have no idea why Scotland can't have a shipbuilding industry in Romania. I do know that because I'm very close to the ferries issue still, I do know it is all an enormous disappointment. And what has happened at Ferguson's, and I supported the buyout Ferguson's, has been a massive disappointment. Mm-hmm. But I also know that, I would, the trouble with this, when you're asking me this question, is I would go a step back from this. And I would say, I do not believe that we should be commissioning 2 new ferries for the Isla run in the way that's being done. It seems to me that we need to rethink how we're doing our commissioning of ferries and what they look like. And we should be buying ferries that are standardized, that are capable of using existing ports, not this absolute insanity of rebuilding piers every time we build it. I have spent an enormous amount of time arguing this case, and I still argue this case. There is absolutely no need. I'm now on a roll on this, I'm afraid. You just have to allow me to finish my rant. We have to get rid of CMAL, which is utterly useless and pointless. It's an asset holder. All an asset holder needs is a spreadsheet. And we need to revise how the state ferry company is run very substantially. There is nobody in the senior management team, despite what they say, who has direct experience of running ferries, and that strikes me as insane. But as to why Romania has an industry and we don't, I don't know. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, Mary.
Okay, thank you. It's a bit disappointed, Mary, but never mind. Next up, Joan D, you had a comment to make?
Going back to one of the things that Mike has spoken about during today, about the various think tanks, groups, organisations that you'll be able to liaise with in order to put documents together. And you showed an example of publication, I think, from 2014. Part of the challenge I think that we have is that we live in an era of Twitter and Facebook, where everything is down to slogans. And whether we like it or not, it's worked. It's worked for Boris Johnson, just getting that soundbite out for the 6 o'clock news. It worked for Trump in America, and it may yet work for him going forward. And I think the point here is that given that we live in that era, we actually have to target a number of groups that we have by getting our own slogans out there. You mentioned an example of, do you want to have one of the lowest pensions in Europe? Let people know what the cost of not having independence would be by telling them the things that they're paying for that they don't want, like Trident and various other things as well. And I think these messages need to be targeted to the various age groups that we're looking for. We're part of an age group that apparently is amongst the lowest in voting for independence. And again, that's probably because people are fearful of the financial thing. But the reality is that they should be afraid of staying in the union because it's actually, as you said, lowest pensions in Europe. Benefits are very poor and so on. And I just think that the way in which we get the message across has to be very succinct, so that as well as the big documents that might come out for those that are deeply interested in politics, including politicians, a lot of people are just looking for a simple message, and those messages should be aimed at the various groups, whether it's young people or old people, etc.
Yeah, I agree, and we do that, all the time. One of the frustrations is sometimes people don't know what we've done because they're not targeted for it or it's not reported. But we do a lot of that. And if you actually look in the election in May, one of the groups that we were most successful with, younger people, was because we targeted through influencers, social media influencers, with very simple messages that those influencers took up and repeated. And actually that was very successful. So a lot of that is done. I think my purpose of showing the wonderful Scotland's Future document was I don't think we should do that type of thing again. On the other hand, and I just want to stick up for those who want information, we do know that people are more likely to change their minds if they are given quality information which they trust. And a good example of this was in the Citizens' Assembly we had. I set that up as a minister. I was very committed, I am very committed to participatory democracy. And it was, the theory of this was always that the more impartial information you gave to a Citizens' Assembly, to a group of voters, the more they would make constructive and very positive decisions. And so it turned out the report from the Citizens' Assembly was a radical, well thought through document, which I hope that the new Scottish Government will implement substantial parts of it. And that was because, by their own admission, they had the time and the opportunity to look at things and to have good impartial information given to them. And that's important. Mm-hmm. So we have to strike a balance here. Some people will be persuaded by slogans and simple memes. Others, and particularly in the case of independence, wish and require to have impartial, full information, as full as they can get, so that they can come to a decision. Now, one of the problems in that is, in politics, no decision is ever final or full. There's always interpretations you can put on things. Somebody will oppose it. I think it was Andrew Wilson who observed on one occasion that if the SNP invented the light bulb, Labour would say it was a dangerous anti-candle device. There's always another position that you can take, and it's a question of how you do this. But I agree with the thrust of what you have argued. But I'm just thinking,
for example, of the work that I think probably most people have seen of organisations like Led by Donkeys, who, by projecting images onto buildings, including the House of Parliament, and various other videos on things like Twitter, have reached a fairly wide audience. I do agree that, it might even be the initial way of attracting people to seek more information, the detail that you're referring to. So I just think it's about making sure that the campaign is pertinent for the era that we live in and the attention span of many of the people that we're trying to convert.
Well, so far so good. Without blowing, the SNP's trumpet too hard, we've won 4 elections on the basis that we've got more votes and more seats than anybody else, and that is to do with communication, and it is to do with more people accepting that communication is valid to them than otherwise. So I think we fully understand that. I think the question is constantly to keep it fresh, and it does keep changing. I tweet regrettably. I often think it's one of the less pleasant things to do in life. But I Instagram, and of course I do a daily photograph on something called Blip Photos. So I'm reasonably social media savvy, but I do not TikTok, and I cannot see circumstances arising in which I will TikTok. And so that has passed me by. And no doubt there will be new social media which will come in, which will pass people who presently TikTok by. You can't be on the cutting edge all the time, but we need to keep changing as a party. Unfortunately, we do employ people and work with people who are on that cutting edge and who do understand it.
So if you want to expand on that subject of the UK assets, that could cover it. Okay, I agree. Assets and debts and assets go together. That is a complex negotiation we're going to have. And therefore, the debt issue is not simple. It's not simple either in precedent, and it's not simple in terms of how it's negotiated. And we'll be negotiating with people who are not trustworthy too. We've seen, I had 5 years as a Scottish representative on
the Joint Ministerial Committee on European Negotiations, I've seen them at their worst and worse and worst. And we're going to have to be prepared to negotiate with people who won't do it honestly and won't do it straightforwardly. I mean, what is happening at the moment with the Northern Irish Protocol was exactly what they always intended to do. Gove was talking about this 18 months ago, which is get it done, get it signed, and then say you don't agree with it and you want to renegotiate it. And that's precisely what is going on now. That's what got the European Research Group, the real fundamentalists of this, over the line and into support of Johnson. That commitment to them made, as we know from the indiscretion of Ian Paisley Jr. yesterday, made to the DUP and to the ERG, that not to worry, just hold your nose and vote for this deal because we won't honor it. And that is what is now going on. So it's going to be difficult. So we have to recognize that, and debts and assets are going to be important parts of that discussion. And you might start on at the basis that whatever sits in Scotland is an asset that we will hold on to, and then you immediately think, oh, hang on a minute, that includes nuclear submarines, so we won't take it that way. So there are other things that you then need to do.
I hope you don't mind me going back to something rather specific about a possible referendum. And that's a while back, I think it was 2017, 2018, there was an independent commission on referendums, and there was a meeting at the Royal Society of Edinburgh here, and my husband and I both attended. Mainly, I have to admit to say, what are they up to? What what's happening? I want to see what's going on here. And to be fair, it was very balanced. And I looked forward to the report coming out, which got emailed to me directly. Went straight to the summary to look and see to what extent the rules of practice, so that it was a review of the rules of practice of referendums that they were doing. And I must say it was the whole of the UK, and they had meetings not only in Edinburgh, but in London, Belfast and Cardiff. So, it was very fair and very balanced. And I was delighted to see that they recommended against a supermajority for any further referendums, because for a start, there hadn't been a supermajority required for the EU referendum. Certain people who are recommending a 60% vote for independence can basically take a hike. The other thing was, I particularly was interested in thresholds, given what happened back in 79, wasn't it? Where the threshold was introduced after the vote. And they were very clear about that no threshold should, for the percentage of the population voting, should be allowed, because it just encourages people to boycott. And I've heard a lot, through social media and so on, I've noticed a lot of people saying, oh, well, you can have your referendum, but the unionists won't, will boycott it. And it was pretty clear that that was a recommendation from this independent commission. I am wondering, here's a question now, I am wondering to what extent the Scottish Government have taken that into account in their creation of the referendums bill.
Yeah, we have taken it into account, and we are also guided by the views of the Venice Commission, which is, the advisory body to the Council of Europe, and has worked extensively on the issue of referendum. I was just looking it up, and they developed their official remit is to identify and develop standards in the areas of elections through codes of good practice on referendums, and to make sure that they understand and recommend an electoral legislation. Now they've been very clear, as the commission was, that supermajorities and thresholds are wrong, and as a democratic instrument, referenda should operate according to normal rules and practices, which is a majority of one is enough. Clearly, you need to be mindful of that in any work you do, it both before and after a referendum. And secondly, that artificial thresholds of any description are wrong. Some of this stuff is fueled by comments, for example, by Alistair Jack. It's a fairly simple principle in Scottish politics. Never take anything that Alistair Jack says seriously, right? Because he hasn't a clue. I mean, he is completely clueless. And you know, he will just have dreamed this up. Somebody will have written it for him, and he thinks it's a good idea. Nobody seriously thinks that, you know, 25 years have to elapse, which was his first condition, and that 60% have to support a referendum for a year or more in an opinion poll. It's just nonsense. I mean, it's complete nonsense. You know, the basic democracy of this is the people of Scotland have elected to government, you know, a party, in fact, two parties who have come together in the Scottish Parliament, who have a mandate to deliver a referendum. It is as simple as that. And the referendum they intend to deliver is a simple referendum. Now, the complication comes with things like, you know, multi-option referendum. And, you know, that is very often a device to try and avoid independence. And, you know, Gordon Brown keeps popping up talking about multi-option referenda. The position of the, you know, and I don't speak for the government, but the position of the SNP is that a simple referendum, according to best practice, which we've tried to do in our legislation, mindful of the Venice Commission and other bodies, is what is required. And that's what we'll deliver.
It was just because of what was mentioned about citizens' assemblies. I've been on a recent call where there was a suggestion, if we can't get a referendum, wouldn't a citizens' assembly on independence be possible? Seems how you're so involved.
It's not definitive. I mean, you know, I agree with the view that, you know, Geoff's view that a referendum is not absolutely essential. Essentially, what is required is a test of public opinion, a test of will. Now, referendum stands as a test of public opinion. There are circumstances in which an election would stand as a test of public opinion, but a citizens' assembly doesn't stand as a test of public opinion. It may be a sample of public opinion, but it's not a test of that public opinion, and therefore I think the answer is no.
You stated earlier that you'd spoken to some groups via transitional constitution. Can you tell us who are the groups you've spoken to, and do you have plans to hold regional assemblies? As many citizens know nothing about these groups, and I'm sure the citizens themselves would like the opportunity to take part. And a second little question or little point regarding what you said earlier about the Greens now being in Parliament. I remember at the time of the election that the Greens said that I believe they would not support a referendum until the end of this Parliament. Does that give the SNP government a problem?
That's not their position. You know, I was involved in that discussion. That's not their position. Their position is that it should be held within this Parliament, and they agree with what Nicola said, that preferably in the first half of the Parliament. So that's not an issue. I'm happy to tell you what the groups are, and then to elaborate a little bit on where we are with this. But we mustn't overdo it. The people who took part in the initial meeting included Pensioners for Independence, in actual fact, National Yes Network, Scottish Independence Convention, Scottish Independence Foundation, Business of Scotland, Believe in Scotland, Commonweal, Christians for Independence, Constitution for Scotland. I see Robert is here, in actual fact. Aberdeen Independence Movement, Lawyers for Independence, Women for Independence, Pensioners for Independence, SNP, and the Greens weren't able to be there, but want to take part. Now, that was a sampling of the Yes movement. You know, there are other people in the Yes movement, but those are the ones who agreed to take part. One of the items on the agenda was to talk about what other groups might be involved. Now, I haven't got this is not a governmental initiative. This is an SNP initiative through me working with some others. So I haven't got resources of government to take this forward. What we have put together is a little resource to work with Dr. Elliot Bulmer, who has written extensively on this, and who will help to draw up a transitional constitution. Now, what it isn't is a final constitution. Now, I want to absolutely stress that 110%, because a couple of people got the wrong end of the stick on this when I was talking about it at conference, and I don't want people to be misled about this. If we were to try and draw up a final constitution of independent Scotland, secondly, it would be wrong, because that's the job of all the citizens, and all the citizens must be engaged in that. And therefore, a citizens' assembly type process is, I believe, the right way to do that. And it must happen very soon after independence. In those circumstances, there will be different views contending. And it must also involve people who did not vote for independence. Again, Elliot has written on that, why that is important, and I agree with him on that. However, we do need something that takes us from the date of independence until that final constitution is ready. And we needs to be something that's better than what we have now. You could just, and it's always been the view that you could just muddle along. But equally, it can't define some of the key issues. For example, it will not settle the issue of the monarch as head of state. I mean, that is an issue that requires the country as a whole to make a decision on. So what we're planning to do in a modest way is, first of all, to get a draft from Elliot and it's more technical than anything else. So there are issues of change. Then we're going to discuss it amongst that group, and we'll discuss other bodies being involved. And then once we've got something that we think is a respectable document, and we're probably talking into the spring of next year, the organizations will agree to consult on it. Now, how they consult on it, I'm not sure. It may be within organizations, it may be more widely than that. So it's very early days. It's an attempt to work together constructively. It's an attempt to follow the positives, not the negatives, and not divide on it. And it's not an attempt to finalize what an independent Scotland is going to look like. It's an attempt to make sure that we can reassure people, for example, I hope they won't need reassurance that the SNP's motives are pure, but that we are not in the business of forming a one-party state, and that there will be, all the recognized and important protections for citizens and the protections to their rights. To go back to the Irish situation, of course, after the establishment of the Free State and then the establishment of the Constitution, there were people who felt very badly done to. There were people who felt that this had been an unfair process and it had been a process that worked against them and their interests. We want to make sure that that does not happen, that we can engage with people and make sure that people are included. So that is what we're trying to do. I'm not going to overclaim for it, and I'm certainly not going to get into the position that it's the be-all and end-all and the center of our work, because we've got to hold a referendum and win a referendum before this even becomes relevant. But it is an important step forward, and I hope that bodies like Pensioners for Independence will discuss it and find it useful.
I attended that meeting, Mike, and that's fully what we intend to do. Once we have the agreed document, we will then send it out to our members and ask for their comments.
Good. Okay, I'm a bit astonished when Geoff says that there's an SNP MSP who thinks we should wait until we have 70% of the polls. I'm not going to be asked for the guilty person to be named, or I might guess, actually, I think. But that having been said, that's just silly. There will be no absolute hard and fast formula that will say, gosh, this is a moment, but 70% would just be, sorry.
I was astonished as well, Mike. I couldn't believe it.
Okay, if there's no specific questions, then we'll draw the meeting to a close. And Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I shall sign on and join you. I can't promise to come to meetings, but I'm very much in support of what you're doing, and more power to your elbow. And thank you very much, everybody.
Well,
thank you.
If you go to our website and go to info@, and your membership you'll be added to our emailing list. Let's put it that way.
Thank you very much.